Okay, so really we're looking at a snip. We're going to try and lift the lid on the title. How do we become animal-loving animal users? Try and lift the lid on that. We can't really delve into it too much, but this is a little snippet then from my research work. And you can see it there on the top there, particularly a chapter called The Species Barrier Maintenance. If you'd like to actually read that, the easiest way to get into it is if you Google Roger Yates social construction. Usually that comes up. Obviously, I'm going to be showing you a PowerPoint and just picking out a few texts from that, just a few highlighted things. So if you want to see the full one at the end, if it's intrigued you enough, then if you email me, roger.yates@ucd.ie. UCD is the University College of Dublin, so that's where I'm an occasional lecturer. What we're really doing then with this thing is going into something that's very basic in sociology, which is the processes of socialization. Although it's a basic concept within the discipline, as you can see here, it can get quite complicated. These are the agents of socialization. We'll be sticking really to the bit at the top in the middle there, kind of family socialization. When we talk about socialization in sociology, we tend to split it up into two things. We talk about primary and then secondary. There is a concept called adult socialization, but mainly we talk about primary and secondary. So we're going to be in that kind of basic kind of area. What we really mean, though, because we make some big claims about socialization, is it's the process by which we become members of society, how we become citizens. It's how we learn the norms and values and the attitudes of our society. There is an aspect to it, though, which is the fact that we learn to conform to those norms and values as well. And in fact, sociologically, one interesting thing is that most people are conformists in a sociological sense. We tend to conform to basic ideas of our own society and our own culture as we're born into it. Even people who self-identify as radical, if you, as it were, scratch between the surface, you'll find that there's quite a lot of conformity in their basic core views which they learn as children. The top left there, you'll see that's the secondary socialization, people like McDonalds. These are the corporations. Bottom there on the right, that's gender socialization. And then the one on the left there at the bottom is a very kind of basic traditional idea in sociology, the idea that social institutions are pouring the norms and values of society into the heads of children. And that means, of course, that socialization is a generational thing. Our norms and values of society are transmitted generationally. And then the last thing on this is this slide shows us two things. First, it's seen as a problem if children are not socialized. So you get kind of, as it were, wild kids, unsocialized children. And in fact, the education system is often seen as the mechanism for which society kind of knocks kids into shape if the family have not done it in the first place. And then in terms of socializing agent, then in a conventional sense, it doesn't apply to everybody, obviously. In a conventional sense, you're talking about the first job is mum. She is the main socializing agent in a kind of conventional sense. And we are talking about very basic things, how to use a knife and fork and how to go to the toilet, this kind of thing. Human beings, when we're born, we're helpless beings. But we learn pretty quick. And so we have to have these agents of socialization. So what's really going on is this. The transmission of society's norms and values, society's culture, and that is transmitted generationally. Okay, so I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. But in terms of our focus, when I have more time and a different audience, a non-vegan audience, if you like, I would give out pencil and paper, and I would just ask people, without any more cues or clues, will you please draw me a farm? And generally speaking, this is what I get back. It's not as good as this. Usually a line drawing of this kind of thing. The only people who don't draw this are animal advocates. I did a talk at my university in North Wales a few years ago, and there was two animal advocates in the audience, and they drew battery cages and sow stalls and slaughter lines. Everyone else drew this. And so there's some kind of common themes that we get. And of course, what people are doing is they're drawing on those early learning books that they experience as kids. So the themes, and this is the main one, is this is a pretty happy place. And so this is the kind of mind's eye farm for a lot of people in two ways. This is either the farm that they know about or the farm that they want to know about, even if they know other things as well. So if you're an animal advocate on the street and you talk about the use of other animals in farming, the chances are people are going to think about this. This is their cultural resource to answer you. This is what they think of in terms of animal farming. So it's a happy place, all free-range beings there. There's no cages. The other animals are said to have homes. They have adventures out in the field, and then they come home, and they are there with their family units. That's another main theme. You've got family units, family groups. In fact, it's usually a bit more elaborate than this. Here we've got ducks and ducklings, but normally we've got chickens and chicks and horses and foals, etc., cows and calves, all smiling, all going back to their home after a day of adventures with their family, and everything is kind of hunky-dory. From an animal rights point of view, you don't have this. In either the pictures that people produce or the books from which they are using as a resource, there is no suggestion of slaughterhouse trucks. They're not going to arrive. So this is a concept that we'll come back to a little later on, the issue of kind of end use. There's no suggestion of end use here. You know, it's just the fact that here you have a farm full of other animals, they all have a great time, and that's the end of the story. Okay, so we'll come back to that. Going back to sociology, but I'm actually using some work from a psycholinguistic professor, Stanley Snapon here. But he's looking at the generational transfer of culture and norms and values. And he does it in a general sense, but he also looks at how our relationship with other animals, other sentient beings. The important part is the bit that's picked out in white. Now, this is North American culture, and children are taught to be kind to one another, to be kind to animals, to abhor cruelty of any sort, that violence is not the way to resolve conflicts, and the taking of life is wrong. Now, normally, that creates a few kind of smirks in the audience because we talk about North American culture and you think, what? But the interesting part about that, and part of my story, is that this is the initial thing that the children are taught. And essentially, what Snapon is talking about is what happens when a little bit of reality comes in. That's where it becomes interesting. But what we get, according to Snapon, is a kind of package of norms and values. He calls it a syllabus. And, of course, again, they're passed on generationally. This is the kind of power. Sociologically, the most powerful things in our lives are the things we don't particularly have to think about. You know, like easygoing oppression, easygoing speciesism, even easygoing racism. If things are like that, unsaid, unspoken about in your society, then they're powerfully within you. It's kind of like we internalize those values. Once people internalize social values, they become part of that person, and that means it's quite hard to shake them then. And, of course, we vegans are in the shaking of values business. Okay, so he says that eventually we kind of have to cue our kids into the fact that society is not quite as rosy as we first told them. Some of the values of real society violate the values that we've just spoken about. And in fact, the violation of those values are often celebrated. So in some senses, this is a problem, and certainly psychologically can't be beneficial, Snapon says. And effectively what he says is that we've got a two-tier value system. We have the kind of goodness and light at the beginning, and then we gradually cue our kids in to the reality. Now this is a general thing. It's not just about our relationships with other animals. We also do it in relation to, say, sexual violence and lots of other kind of issues. Parents protect their kids from knowledge. Okay, so we tend to think, well, we'll tell them this, and then when they're old enough to know, we'll tell them that. It's kind of a natural thing to do as parents. We protect our kids in that way, and we also do it in relation to our use of other animals. So this is about the only thing I'm going to read out. It said that adults typically raise children from birth to 5 or 6 years in a kind of fantasy land of ideal behavior on the part of the world's inhabitants. In this land of goodness and mercy, other animals are humanity's friends, and vice versa applies. So this is the kind of vision that we get initially. And when Snapon looked at the publications from which people draw those pictures that I talked about, then he finds the same pattern. There's no kill lines, there's no slaughter. And in fact, generally speaking, in a very overt sense, you don't see in these early learning books other animals being eaten or on the plate in an overt sense of that's what it is. You might see pizza being eaten, or you might see hamburgers, but you don't necessarily understand that you're dealing with a dead body, essentially. So this is Snapon's research question, which is of interest to us, because what indeed does happen when we kind of move from that fantasy land and we start to learn that actually some of our values in society are not so good. What's really going on is that we're moving from being moral patients into being moral agents. Now, this is quite important for us. In the animal rights sense, we are already involved with a lot of animal exploitation before we're moral agents. We're already involved. We're already eating them. We're already wearing them. We're already using the cosmetics and medication. We're already involved. We're already there. And then we become moral agents, and we can think about moral issues. And then you think, right. Some part of what goes on is that when people go vegan, they kind of have to admit that hitherto they've been making moral error upon moral error until then. And then they kind of have to deal with it, in a sense. What Snapon is saying, as I suggested, is that there is a reconditioning goes on. Really, we're cueing people in to adult life. And what he says about adult life is it's full of denial. Now, one thing we do know about human beings, there's extensive literature on this, is that we are very good at denial. Going all the way back to Freud and onwards, we are very good at denial. We know how to deny things. There's lots of cases, some very disturbing cases where people do things and then they deny that they've done it afterwards. Some really kind of disturbing things. We're really good at this. I've got a chapter in my work about denial where it's something that we shouldn't underestimate. It's very important. So this is what goes on. We're transforming other animals from this fantasy people into objects of utility, as Snapon puts it. In other words, we start to cue our kids in that we use other animals in a variety of ways. And so we might do that by just talking about categories. For example, we might use the category pets to talk about a particular type of use. We might then talk about the ones that we eat. We can talk about the ones that we wear. We can use categories like wildlife or vermin. And so we're kind of cueing our kids in to the fact that our relationship with other animals is far more complicated than what was initially kind of taught to us. And in some senses, kind of deal with that and also kind of eat your food. And another general kind of psychoanalytical point is that society is full of denial, which means that in some senses we do kind of lie to ourselves. So adults lie to themselves. We also lie to other people, and we lie to our kids. From a psychoanalytical point of view, that's actually common, and it's actually understandable. It's a functional thing to do. Being absolutely, totally truthful all the time would be quite a hard thing to do. We often say that knowledge equals power, but there's a very real sense that knowledge also can equal pain. And the animal advocates here who make it their business to kind of give out literature will know about this, because in some senses, if you try to give somebody a leaflet on the street, you're kind of potentially giving them some pain if it's only psychic pain. If you flip it around the other way and you're the recipient and there's an animal advocate coming for you and you go, okay, this person's trying to give me some information, am I going to welcome this information? Maybe I'm not. Maybe this is not going to be a story that I want to hear much about. Maybe this is something that I would like to stay fairly kind of pushed away. It's a very real thing. Carol Adams talks about it with a fairly famous concept called the absent referent. I don't know if you've heard of the absent referent, but essentially one example of that would be when we go into a restaurant, we don't order a dead body. We order a steak. But by saying steak, that is the socially sanctioned way of ordering a dead body. Okay, that's what's going on. We are ordering a part of a dead body, but we call it a steak. And so there's the actual referent is absent. An example of that, when I started volunteering with the VIP here on my T-shirt, Vegan Information Project in Dublin, we were given permission to do some stalls in Temple Bar, which is a very famous kind of touristy place in Dublin. I'm sure some of you have been there. And our stall was pretty close to a hamburger bar. And they complained to the people who gave us permission in the first place. And we said, but we don't have any graphic photographs on the stall, which is true. We don't. But we were missing the point because it doesn't need graphic photographs. What was going on is that they're eating their hamburgers and looking over at pictures of farmed animals. And it's making the connection again. It's bringing back the absent referent. The thing that they have scrupulously and very carefully pushed away, the animal part of their hamburger, is being brought back into their consciousness. And we do know that vegans, just being in a room sometimes, is uncomfortable. Because if people know you're a vegan, you bring back, by your very presence, the absent referent. You're bringing back the issue that people have very carefully pushed away, that people are in denial of. So if people react to you in that negative way, these are the reasons why. These are the reasons why they're not comfortable about you being there. You don't have to say anything. Just you being there is enough. If they know you're a vegan, then it can be a problem. So people don't want to know necessarily. People say all the time, I don't want to know, don't tell me. You've probably seen this in your family or whatever. Don't tell me, I don't want to know. It'll spoil my dinner. Very, very common thing. So what is it better to know? Because in the literature, it's interesting, there are other things to do with knowledge than know it. Say that again. There are other things to do with knowledge than know it. We cannot know things. And there's a couple of ways that works. We can actually physically not know, or we can kind of know a little bit and then say, okay, I know about that now, I'll move on. Don't tell me about the third world starving, the developing countries, and food security. I know all that. I got the Live Aid DVD. Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I'll move on. So it's a kind of shallow understanding. So you don't really fully know. So what's better to know? We're back to the books. This is one of the books that I looked at in my research, Tales from Mudpuddle Farm. As you can see here, there's an entire community of other animals and two human animals, the farmers, Farmer Rafferty. What's going on in this book is a really cozy social contract, a reciprocal kind of thing going on. And it's summed up by that bottom bit there, if you can see it. You look after me, and I'll look after you. That's what the farmer says to the other animals. You look after me, and I'll look after you. How that plays out in the story is really fascinating. What you've got is there are free-range hens on this farm, and they lay their eggs for the farmer. It's almost like this is the rent they pay. And, farmers will actually say this to us. They don't do it to reproduce their species. They don't do it for themselves. They don't do it just because it's biological. They do it for the farmer. And in particular, there are 2 cows on the farm, and they let their milk down for him. This is interesting, as though they could keep it up as one thing. But what's interesting on this level, there are no calves on this farm, just adult cows who provide milk for the farmer. There's no issue about pregnancy. There is no tapping into mammalian biology. We might know this as vegans. Isn't it strange that there are so many people out there in society, they don't seem to know that they're mammals and what that means, including women. They don't know what it means to be a mammal. And so they say that cows just give milk. They give milk for life. But they know that they couldn't do that. They would dry up, But they don't transfer that to other mammals. And part of that is the fact we're in denial again. We don't self-identify as animals. If people call you an animal in the street, they're insulting you, right? We don't self-identify as mammals, and we certainly don't self-identify as apes, do we? Again, if somebody called you an ape, now if somebody called me an ape, I should say, yeah, no. But we don't. We see it as an insult, right? So that's what's going on in this situation. Very cozy social contract where the other animals work along with the farmer. Now, just to bring this back, this issue came back into my consciousness a few years after the research in a kind of weird and unusual place, and it was this. Came back as a McDonald's Happy Meal. And in fact, there's a YouTube of the illustrator talking about this, and he's kind of going, wow, I did the illustrations for this book, and now McDonald's have done it on the Happy Meal. How fab is that, as it were? But I was thinking, wow, there's a bit of a disconnect there, isn't there? Somebody draws pictures of happy animals, and now there's bits and pieces of animals in this box. But in fact, it is actually quite easy to think about. And the real key to it is the word happy. So we've got other animals on happy farms, and what better to perpetuate this myth than that they find themselves in a happy meal? So everything is happy right from birth to slaughter, which is never mentioned in the first place. So it's not particularly difficult to think that these other animals find themselves on the cover of a McDonald's Happy Meal. It's not as shocking as we might initially think. Okay, this is some other, just to finish off really, some other publications that I looked at. Some of the very basic ones are really kind of getting the kids, what they do. You get the kids to, what do animals say? What does a cow say? What does a dog say? That kind of thing. However, the narrative of these books can get quite complicated fairly quickly. The one in the middle there, Nubbins and the Tractor, that's a fascinating book. It's about animal property. It's about the transfer of animal property from one human being to another. And that taps into the fact that culturally, other animals are things. In law, there are two categories, persons and things. They are things. They are items of property. We can kill our animal property so long as we don't cause unnecessary suffering, which is a cornerstone of animal welfare. We can kill our pets. We can kill our animal companions. We can do it ourselves so long as we don't cause unnecessary suffering. Normally what we do is take them down to the vet once we're fed up of our living ornaments. So what happens in the story is that the farmer buys a tractor. This makes Nubbins the horse redundant. And so Nubbins is going to be sold. And the son doesn't like that. And so he says to his dad, can you transfer the ownership of Nubbins to me? Which he does. And then the tractor breaks down. And so that means that suddenly Nubbins is needed again to work on the farm. And the end of the story is you've got the son, now the animal owner, and the owned, happy as Larry, going back to work on the farm. So there is actually quite an interesting narrative going on there. The Four Ways Farm is a kind of entire community of other animals. Humans don't seem to appear there at all, as though they just live there and have their adventures, etc. When we get into the teenage market, we're back into categories now. This is Animals and You. It's kind of like a poppy kind of magazine. It's aimed at teenage girls or young women. And they're really into the categories game. Most of it is about pets. Most of it is about the other animals that are categorized as pets. Free-living beings get a mention too. And actually, farmed animals do get a mention, but only as food. So what you would get, say, there's a Christmas edition, and the question there is, what should we have for Christmas lunch? And the answer is, well, we'll have the traditional turkey and all the trimmings. So the image there that you get is of the child and the pet enjoying the unnamed farm animal. Now, again, playing with the categories that we've come to understand. Some of them we use as pets, some of them we use as food, some of them we use to wear. And finally, we've got Market Day. This is like a board game. It's a bit like Monopoly. And the players in Market Day are farmers, and they rush around the board, having all kinds of adventures, and they win. You know, each farmer is a winner once their farm is full of other animals. There's no questioning issue about why would they do that, what are they going to do with it, so there's no end game again. It's as though culturally, well, we're dealing with farmers here. What do farmers do? They fill their farms with other animals. That's what they do. So this is what this game is all about. Quite an interesting kind of issue in the sense that end use, again, culturally, is absent. You know, why spoil the game by getting them to take them to the slaughterhouse? And so we're trying to lift the lid on this question then. How do we end up in this state? And the sociological answer is that we're born into a culture in which this is the norm. We're born into the culture where it's said to us that you can love animals and you can eat them. You can love animals and you can use them. You can love animals and they can be used in vivisection laboratories, etc. You can even love them and hunt them. Okay? This is a cultural thing. And the kind of categories help because we know that there are some we use as pets. The ones who are designated as pets, their use is to be petted and to be loved. The ones designated as food, their use is to be eaten. Which is why sometimes in some horrible, filthy, disgusting foreign land, some people make categorical errors, don't they? And they start frying and boiling up the cats and the dogs. And all the people in Britain and elsewhere, they go rather upset about that because they're doing it to the wrong types. That's the problem there. And so you get all this racist stuff coming out. You know, the damn Chinese and the damn Japanese and everything else, because they are using other animals which our culture says is wrong. Really, they're just using them. I mean, in Japan, for example, foxes are seen as sacred. We hunt them, you know. So that kind of lifts the lid on this question, and it shows that we are born into a deeply speciesist society. That is our job. As animal advocates, as vegans, we have to challenge cultural speciesism. If we don't, we'll never win. We can't win so long as the culture of our society is deeply speciesist. It's not about individual butchers or vivisectors. It's about the culture. We have to find a way of shifting the culture to make it not acceptable anymore to teach our kids that they can be animal-loving, animal users.